Okay, I think we're going to get started here. If everybody wants to take a seat. We have a couple more people out there that need to take a seat. You're good? Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming today to our Vietnam War 360 program. This is actually the 10th and final program in this series. My name is Katie Carpenter, and I am the project lead for Minnesota Remembers Vietnam at TPT, Twin Cities PBS in St. Paul. And Minnesota Remembers Vietnam is actually a statewide initiative of Minnesota's 6 PBS stations. This year we've all been gathering Minnesota's perspectives on the Vietnam War to complement the 18-hour series by Ken Burns and Lynn Novick that broadcast this past fall. Have any of you seen the documentary on PBS? So a lot of you. We all know that even in the 18 hours, there were still some missing perspectives that weren't covered. One of our goals with this initiative is really to bring in as many voices and perspectives as we can. And one way that we did that was a website called The Story Wall, which is mnvietnam.org. And this is just a platform that anybody who has a perspective about the Vietnam War can go and share. We've been gathering over 800 stories this year, and today we're really lucky to hear from 5 people that lived through the experience. They've been impacted by the war, and the concept of the 360 program is just to really give you a diverse taste of the lasting impact of the war from many different voices. So thank you so much for taking the time to come out today. Thank you to our panelists, and also to MELSA, who they coordinated all 10 of these events across the Twin Cities this spring, and to Judy, who organized this great event, the Roseville Library, and also the cable access channel that's here today. That is CTV North Suburbs, that's actually covering it and making sure that even more people can experience this. So the format for today, we're going to have each of our speakers give a 10-minute presentation about their own perspective, and then we'll open it up to questions from you. So really I think that's the most special part, to really dig in and ask questions. So please be thinking of a few questions for each person. So, and I think Mary, do you want to we'll pull up a seat for Mary, but we're going to kick it off with Jerry Myron, who is going to talk about his experiences serving as a Vietnam War vet. Sure. We'll give you some warnings for time.
How's that sound, okay? Okay. Again, my name is Jerry Myron, and I am obviously a Vietnam veteran. My first question is, how many veterans do we have here in the audience? Please raise your hand. Okay, we got a number of them. And how many of you are from Vietnam or fought in Vietnam? One of them, 2 of them. Thank you so much for your service, all of you. And us Vietnam people, I can touch on a little bit later, but we know how we were treated when we came back from Vietnam, and we certainly were not told thank you for your service the way we were treated. I am going to start a little bit about, I have a wife and 3 kids. I've been married for going on 45 years now, and I will have to say the relationship that I have with my wife and kids is so awesome, because that's how I've been able to get to where I am today. I haven't talked for over 45 years just because I didn't want to talk, and my wife knows probably 20% of what happened to me over there. She doesn't know the rest, and my kids don't know anything. I'll get right into it because it seems like I never have enough time to talk. I was drafted in 1967, December of 1967. I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky for basic training. I usually concentrate a little bit more on talking about it, but I'd rather get into Vietnam and that. Then from there I went to Fort McClellan, Alabama, which is AIT, Advanced Infantry Training. To just put it blunt, that's where they teach you to kill and kill as quickly as you possibly can. From there, I put in for airborne. I didn't get it. They sent me to Fort Benning, Georgia as a scout dog handler. And when I tell people that, probably the same thing you're all saying right now, what in the heck is a scout dog handler? A scout dog handler is walking point for the infantry with a German Shepherd dog. So I spent 3 months in Fort Benning, Georgia, and then they sent me over there to Vietnam. I did not take my dog with me. I got a dog while I was over there just because the dogs have to go through 3 different tours in Fort Benning, Georgia before they can get sent over. To get kind of right into it, I think one of the disadvantages that I had over there was that I was so young. It was an advantage, and yet it was a disadvantage. And the other thing was the amount of time that they gave me at Fort Benning, Georgia. It took me 9 months in Vietnam before I knew, I don't care what my dog did. It doesn't matter what my dog did. I could tell you why he was doing it. When Rebel alerted, that was my dog's name, Rebel. When Rebel alerted, I could tell you whether there's a base camp. I could tell you whether there's an ambush. I could tell you whether there's a cache of weapons. Tell you a booby trap, whatever it was. I could tell you what it was and how far out it was. It took me 9 months to get to that point. And so, of course, the first 9 months, it was like, who taught me? Really, my dog, Rebel, is the one that actually taught me. I will never forget my very first alert, the very first alert. And Rebel alerted, and I looked at him. I said, "Search, boy, search." And he stopped. He threw another alert, and he looked back at me, and I yelled, "Search, boy, search." And then all of a sudden it hit me. Holy smokes, he's throwing an alert. This is my first alert. And believe me, I was scared. I'm 19, going on 20 years old out there. I've got 185 people behind me. I've got a CO and commanding officer, CO, West Point graduate, and he's asking me, a 19-year-old, and he's 28 years old, on what to do. So my first alert, after Rebel did alert, he looked back at me, and if I could read my dog's eyes, which I did, his eyes looked at me and it said, "Oh no, not another veteran I got to train." I could talk on and on about Rebel and I. I'll tell you, when I say being young, I remember being out on a mission. By the way, I'm out there for about 35 days, and then I'm in for a 2 or 3 day stand down. And that's not for me, that's for my dog. Because the heat there, the terrain, the heat at 115 to 120 degrees, you got the terrain, you got bamboo that we're walking through, so the dog could only take about 35 days, and you had to go in for a 2 or a 3 day stand down. And then I'm back out again. Whoever wanted me could use me. I work with the Green Beret, the 1st Cav, 82nd Airborne, Big Red 1. Whoever wanted me could use me. I remember this one time that I was working for the Big Red 1, 1st to the 28th. And I called an alert. And the CO said, "What's going on?" And I said, "There's an ambush out on the left, 250 meters out." And he looked at me and he said, "LRP reports that recon reports that there's nothing out there." I said, "Well, Rebel and I are never wrong. I'm telling you that there's an ambush that's out there on the left." He said, "Move forward, dog man." I said, "I ain't going anywhere. There's an ambush that's out there and I'm not walking into it." And I said, "My dog is trained to find this. I'm not." And so he said, "I'm giving you a direct order." And I said, "I don't care. I don't want to die because of your direct order because you don't know what's going on." So what he did for you military guys is he called a cluster, and you fill in the other word. You know what it is if you're military people. And he called up 5 of his guys and told them to go out and check it out. Well, just before those 5 guys went out, I said, "I want to talk to you guys." And I said to them, "There's an ambush that's out there. I'm telling you, there's an ambush that's out there. Keep your guns off a safe. Get spread out. They're on the left-hand side around 250 meters out." they started asking me a couple questions. I said, rebel's never wrong. When you see the fear in a soldier's eye that's looking right back at you, same thing, he's 19, he's 20, he's 21 years old. You read the fear in his eyes. That's something you'll never forget. These guys were really scared. They were very nervous. Just by reading their eyes, they knew that they were walking into an ambush and that they may not be coming back again. He sent them out, and all 5 were killed. I looked at the CO, and I said, what the hell am I doing here? Why am I here if I'm calling alerts and you're not going to listen to me? I said, get me on a chopper and get me the heck out of here. He said, I'll listen to you from here forward. And I said, the sad part is you just caused 5 lives because you wouldn't listen to me. And his response back to me is, but you're so young. I says, but I'm trained. So that's what I mean when I say that there's a disadvantage of being young while you're over there. My first mission, when I first got there, I was in Quan Loy, which is up on the Cambodian border. I love telling this. I speak to students a lot in a lot of schools, and I love telling this particular story. When you're in combat, you could get 6 letters a day, and it's never enough. So I said, how do I stay close to home? One of the ways to stay close to home, I thought, I know, I used to be a paper boy. I'm going to order the paper. So I ordered the St. Paul paper. And it comes rolled real tight in brown paper. You know, it's about that long and it's about that round, rolled real tight, except the Sundays, and they're huge. But anyway, up there, our mail call came about by chopper about every 10 to 12 days, along with our food and our ammo. And so all of a sudden, mail call comes, and I've got about 10 or 12 papers that are sitting down there. And I said, hey, I got to pull one of these. I don't know which one. This one looks good. Now remember, I'm in Cambodia. I'm pulling an ambush. Now before I got sent there, the CO said, okay, this is a secret mission. It's a secret mission. You're heading into Cambodia. You're looking for General Ware, one of our generals that shot down, and you're pulling an ambush. If you get caught, that's your fault. You weren't supposed to be there. I said, okay, CO, I'll just stay here. Get on the chopper, dog man. So the papers are laying there. I grab one of them, pull an ambush in Cambodia. I rip it open, and the headlines reads, Nixon denies it. We are not in Cambodia. Guess what, guys? Showed it to everybody. We're not here. And they said back to me, those bunch of lying, and you can fill in the words that you want of word, because they used all of them. So that was another experience. I'll tell you something that really amazed me, and that was firefights. Everybody understands where the firefight is, I'm assuming. That's where the enemy engages you. I remember this particular firefight that I was in, and it was like a lot of them. This firefight seemed like it just didn't end. Our COs are running all over the place, West Point graduates that are running around, barking orders, knowing exactly what's going on. This firefight lasted for 3.5 to 4 hours. I knew it did. And when this firefight ended, the CO said that firefight lasted 20 minutes. I knew it was 3.5 hours. Well, some of you guys that wear, you understand. It's the stress that you're under. And what's amazing that I've talked about before when I talk about firefights, usually, to adults in that, you really get a high when you're in a firefight. You get a high out of it. And I used to wonder how and why. Why am I getting a high out of this? I believe in my mind it's because I'm cheating death. I believe it's like a skydiver. I think that's the reason why we all go skydiving, is just because we think we're cheating death. And to me, that's what it's like when I was in firefights. It was like I was cheating death. And as soon as the firefight is over, you go into the lowest lows that you can ever go into. I'll tell you something else about over there is body counts. I remember being in this one firefight, and I remember 38 to 40 of our guys were killed. We killed probably 250 to 300 of their people. Very next day, I was going home for stand down, and the radio's always on over there playing. And they start talking about the firefight that I was in, and they're saying we got 16, 18 of our guys killed. We killed about 1,200 of their guys. And I'm looking at it saying, it's a damn lie. I was in that firefight. Don't tell me it was 12 to 15 that were killed. It was almost 40 that were killed. We counted 250. You're telling me it's 1,200. So they lied to us a number of times that we're over there. And those are some of the questions that I sometimes get asked is, how was it over there? Did they tell you the truth? Did they lie to you? And, you know, a lot of us know what they did, and I'm trying to find out some of the reasons. And I believe part of it was to keep the morale up. The other part was to lie to us and lie to you that we're back home, that we're really winning this war. I learned so much from that Ken Burns documentary that I didn't even know, and even though I was over there. The three things about, you know, our three presidents and how they didn't give a damn about us. You listened to it. If you saw it, it was in their own name. I mean, their own voices. I mean, they didn't care. They cared about getting reelected. That's what they cared about, was about getting reelected. And that really makes me mad. And I can go deep into it. I don't know if I'll have time in the past, next, but one thing, please, as you listen to all of us that are here, my first thing is if you see Jerry Myron, you shouldn't. You should not see me. You should see the 2.5 million soldiers that fought in in Vietnam, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, World War II, Korea. That's who you should see. I just happen to be the vehicle that's up here, but it took me 45 years to get here. So don't see me, see those people that are there. Iron Will, jot this down. I don't know who's heard of Iron Will. Iron Will is a documentary, and there's actually 38 of us that are in there. It's all wounded or otherwise disabled combat veterans. I'm the only one from the state of Minnesota that's in it. Look up ironwillmovie.com, and you'll see a trailer there. It's about a 2-hour movie, and Billy Bob Thornton does the narrating, and Netflix is going to be picking up in the late fall. Last quick thing, you're saying, what is this Jerry's wearing? I skate for the Minnesota Warriors ice hockey, which is all wounded or otherwise disabled combat veterans, and we use ice hockey as our outlet for stress. Look up mnwarriors.com. We play against the NHL alumni once or twice a year, and it's just an absolute blast skating with them. We started out 5 years with 5 skaters. We're up to 165 skaters, and 9 of them are women. I got lots more to talk about, but my time's up.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Thank you so much, Jerry. Jerry also brought some of his artifacts, some of his uniform. He also has his photo album, if you want to check it out afterwards. He has some amazing pictures of Rebel in there, if you want to check out. So next we're going to hear from Mary Beth Crowley, who's a veteran, Vietnam vet, nurse. Come on up.
Hi. You're probably wondering how I ended up in Vietnam. I graduated from the University of Minnesota in nursing in 1969, and prior to that, I worked at the VA in Minneapolis as an aide on an orthopedic floor. And being on an orthopedic floor, I ended up working with a number of veterans there. And one of the ones who probably impressed me the most was a young man who had been hit by a rocket and ended up as a triple amputee. He had lost both of his arms and one of his legs. And he was probably one of the bravest young men that I, at that time, had ever met in my life. And I think he impressed me so much that I think that was a motivator for me to end up going to Vietnam. I ended up, as soon as I graduated, I ended up in the Army Nurse Corps. I spent 4 months at Walter Reed and then got orders for Vietnam. So I went to Vietnam with 4 months' experience as a nurse, which wasn't a whole lot of experience, but fortunately the people who were there before you kind of helped you along to find your way and taught you what you needed to know along the way. I remember going on the plane to California and crying, and nobody said a word to me, which was, I found sort of odd, but maybe it wasn't at the time. I ended up at Travis Air Force Base and had to wait. I was on the wait list to go to Vietnam. I guess there were so many people who wanted to go at the time that you kind of had to take your turn. But anyway, finally got on a plane with 2 other nurses, and we went through Anchorage, Alaska, and then Japan, and finally arrived in Vietnam about 5 in the afternoon at Tan Son Nhut, and ended up in what they call the Repo Depot, or the Replacement Battalion. And the 3 of us, of course, nobody tells you anything. You just sort of get pointed in the right direction and told to go, and so you go. Usually, just about wherever you are, there's flares going off all night, and of course, we didn't know this, and we had outdoor bathrooms, and so we decided we better go to the bathroom before we go to bed. So 2 of us are on our way out, and they start shooting off these flares. And this is our first night in Vietnam, so I think both of us hit the ground at the time thinking they were probably shooting at us. And of course they weren't, but we didn't know that at the time. It took me about a week to get to my duty station. We would go to the airport in Long Binh and wait for about 12 hours, and the plane never came to take us, so we'd go back and the next day go again and wait for the plane, and finally we ended up getting one. We ended up going to Da Nang first and waiting there, I think, for about a day to finally end up on a chopper. And another nurse and I ended up going to An Khie, which is in the Central Highlands between Pleiku and Nguyen. At that point, the 4th Division had been in An Khie for probably just a few months. Initially, they had been in Pleiku and had moved then to An Khie, and that was where they were doing their fighting then. The 4th Division was approximately 20,000 troops. Our hospital was approximately 125 beds. We medevac patients out 3 times a week with the Air Force, so we had to keep people moving all the time. As I can recall, the chopper trip from Da Nang to An Khie took about 6 hours, because along the way we were stopping and doing mail drops all along, and so it took that long. Finally arrived in An Khie, and I think we were met by the chief nurse, and she took us over to the officers club, which really was nothing to write home about. It was a cement slab with a parachute over the top of it, and that was pretty much it. It had maybe 3 things on the menu, and that was it too. I initially started out on a medical floor, which treated patients with malaria, hepatitis, that kind of thing. I preferred going to a surgical ward, so I ended up there in a short time. And that's where we took care of patients who'd been injured from the war. We also had one specific ward, which was for the Vietnamese patients. We took care of not only like Kit Carson scouts, who were Vietnamese soldiers who worked with the American soldiers, also South Vietnamese soldiers. At times we would have VC or NVA, North Vietnamese Army. They were usually brought in by the military intelligence patients. We probably would just have them for a few days to kind of get them over the hump. whenever we would have them, we always had a military police person with them. And once they left, we never really knew what happened to those patients. We not only had patients injured from the war, but we would have at times children who came in with diseases which we never saw in the US. I remember we had a child who had come in with rabies, and we really didn't treat that. We had no isolation at all in this hospital. So we had to medevac that child out to a different hospital who had isolation. We did treat a child who came in with tetanus. And I think initially, of course, no American doctor would ever have treated anybody with this. And we did have a couple of foreign doctors who were in the Army. Kind of the way they got them into the Army was rather tricky of the Army. They were near the end of their residency program, and if they wanted to stay and finish the residency program, the Army told them they either had to come into the Army and do their duty, or they'd be sent back to their own country before they finished the residency. So most of them went into the Army then and, ended up in Vietnam, and then came back to the US and finished the residency program. But we did have a doctor from Pakistan, and it was a good thing because he recognized a lot of these diseases that we wouldn't have had a clue about. But he recognized the tetanus in this child, so we did more like palliative care with the child and took care of her pain and things. There really wasn't anything we could do to cure her because she was kind of toward the end of the tetanus, and she ended up dying with us then. We had a lot of babies who came in with what's known as FUO, fever of unknown origin. Like the parents came in when the medicine men, like their own little chiefs in their villages, couldn't do anything with what they had, so they bring them to us, and a lot of times we could maybe put IVs in them and try antibiotics and things, and a lot of times that didn't work for them. So we kept them with us till they would die. And I think that was probably one of the hardest things. I knew I was going to Vietnam to take care of our soldiers, from injuries from the war, but I really had never thought about taking care of children from diseases which were endemic to the country that I was in. And it was hard seeing these little kids die and knowing there really wasn't a whole lot that we could do for them. I know one time we had a woman who had come in. She wasn't Hmong, but she wasn't Vietnamese either, but she lived up in the hills, and she had been shot in her arm, and she had a baby who was under a year old. He wasn't injured, but she was still nursing him, so she brought him in when she came in with her gunshot wound to the arm. And so as she healed, I think the nurses ended up taking care of the little baby, and we called him Barney. And I think Barney's little feet, he wasn't walking yet, but I don't think his feet ever touched the ground because somebody was always holding him. And I don't think he'd ever had baby food before, and we didn't have a lot of baby food. But we ended up, I think we fed him like pudding and that kind of thing because that's all we had. And we would feed him milk then too. We had a formula that we'd make up, and he got that too. But he was the sweetest little baby, and everybody just ended up loving him. And his mother eventually got better, and she took him back to her village, but we were sad to see little Barney go. I think we might have treated him for worms. It seems like just about everybody who came in had some kind of worms. And I'd never really seen that before either, and I know that the corpsmen always just loved to show me that kind of thing. Especially if a patient had a colostomy, and then they really liked that, to show me the Ascaris worms swimming around in the colostomy bag. But I toughened up during the year. An-Khe seemed like it was sort of out in the middle of nowhere. We never, there really wasn't anywhere to go anyway, so we never left where the area was. We had to stay pretty much where we were. I think I'd been there about 6 weeks before I was involved in my first red alert. We always had an MP who stayed at nighttime in the nurses' quarters just to make sure nothing ever happened to us. And so in the middle of the night one time, probably about 12:30 at night, we heard all these explosions going off and sirens and things. And the MP was knocking on our doors, so we all had to get up and put on our helmets and flak jackets and go to the hospital, and we evacuated our hospital and put everybody, now if I can remember what they're called, you know, where you put people in a safe area with a bunker, in a bunker, put them all in bunkers. And the patients, I mean, the people who couldn't ambulate would be taken out on, like on gurneys or however we could get them out. Usually it was the corpsmen and the doctors who did that. And then people who could walk were sitting then on benches, and pretty much there wasn't any room left after that for anybody. So we'd either have to stand or sit on the concrete, and then once it was light out, everybody was brought back into the hospital, and then the nurses went back up and put their fatigues on then and worked all day. And I remember sort of halfway running to the hospital then and seeing all these explosions. The hospital was somewhat on a higher area, and we had a huge area that were for medevac helicopters and loaches and that kind of thing. And that's what they were blowing up that evening. And so you could see all these explosions and hear all these helicopters going up in the air then too. They were trying to get as many up so they wouldn't end up blowing them up. And I can still remember at the time how much my legs were shaking and just how frightened I was. And I don't think I've ever been that scared again in my life, and I doubt if I'll ever be that scared again. But that was the first time that happened, and then this was in April, and then I think in May, probably in the middle part of May, troops again were going into Laos at this time. Of course, we were told, of course, nobody's in Laos either, but a lot of the troops were going into Laos at that time, and I think the Vietnamese wanted to let us know that they were not happy about this, or the Viet Cong, that they weren't happy about all of this. So they decided they would hit our area every other night then for about 2 weeks. And nobody was too thrilled about working the night shift, but when you're having to stay up all night, you prayed then that you were on the night shift so you didn't have to be up. So again, we had to haul everybody out, stay up all night, haul them back, change your clothes, go back and work all night. So a lot of Vietnam was being sleep deprived, as I recall, but you know, you're young and you can handle that kind of thing. And I think, is my time about up? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Beth. Here's another great photo. If you want to actually hear more about Mary Beth's story, she performed in a play called Minnesota Remembers Vietnam, the Telling Project, and we have DVDs of the play and the documentary that we did. If you'd like to grab a copy on your way out, you can also stream it online at tpt.org, and it's phenomenal, really personal and neat. So we are going to move on to Don Petterson. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to anticipate a couple of questions right away. I did own a hair comb back then. And yes, when I went to go get a beer, the bartender asked me for my ID. Even though I could fly, the Air Force let me fly the supersonic thing. Who saw the flyover at the beginning of the Twins home opener? 4 of these were flying that opener. And NASA astronauts use these for proficiency. And the reason I talk about this is because I want to contrast it with my favorite plane, and we can go look at that next. I flew a C-141 cargo plane, 4-engine. They're already retired, and now they're C-17s, but they look pretty similar. Anybody ever have a ride on a C-141? You did, yeah. They're not fun. Your head's cold, your feet are hot, there's no windows, you know, the seats are funny. So this plane was fun to me. The other one was a sports car. This one's like a truck. But I used this one with other people to help bring back the POWs home. And I also flew in the 1973 October Israeli-Arab War. Remember the Yom Kippur War? Huge airlift into there. We flew twice as far with less planes and brought in more than the Russians. They were flying into Syria and Lebanon. And then I also helped bring about 100 Hmong back from northern Thailand, the first leg of their way over to the U.S. as thank you for helping. But what I want to take you through today is Saigon evacuation as the country was falling. So I was a pilot in the service from about 71 to 76, before the end of the war and then through the end until just after. And we can probably use the next slide. So here's the inside. Can you see that okay? We're looking from the front to the back. That light is coming through a couple paratroop doors. You can picture one on each side. And not all planes are rigged any particular way. This one has some stretcher racks, which we did not have when I flew into the Saigon evacuation. But I wanted you to see that as I talk through what we did to get ready for that. So the scene here, now the timing is March and April of 75. And we were going in and out, we meaning C-130s and C-141s. C-130 are typically what you see around here. The National Guard flies a 4-engine propeller planes, right? And then 1 or 2 C-5s. You might remember a C-5 crashed out there. In the Saigon evacuation, they also called it the baby lift. There was a bunch of children on that plane, about 300 some people. Almost half got killed on that. It wasn't pilot error, it wasn't shot down, it was a mechanical problem. So it was a pretty hectic time. You might remember a picture of a airliner that was up on Da Nang. I don't have a picture of it, sorry. Where it was being overwhelmed by people wanting to get on for a ride. You know, on the back of the plane, it had a stairway that came down and people were trying to climb on. People were fighting folks off. So that happened at Da Nang. They were trying to leave there and go down to Saigon. That happened before we went in. And then we went in before the helicopters, who were the last ones to be going. So give you a feel for what was going on. South Vietnam was losing its battle. This is 2 years after the prisoners were left. There was no U.S. forces there anymore. We were just trying to help the people who helped us leave, get our own people out. So on that plane, that airliner, there were more people that got on board than seats in the compartment, and then 60 people got onto the cargo area, and then 7 people were hanging onto the landing gear. Excuse me, it took off with that stairway down. It never raised its gear because it didn't want to hurt anybody, and it didn't know what would ever get the gear back down if it did. So that's how that left. So at our briefing, before we left, they said, there are no U.S. forces there. We can't rely on the South Vietnamese necessarily, because on that plane, it wasn't citizens that were taking that airline. It was the South Vietnamese military kicking off civilians and getting out themselves. So some were fighting, some were backing up and still fighting, and some were doing other things. So they said, be careful when you go in there on the ground. We're going to send your plane empty, so we didn't have those stretcher racks. You're going to take a full load of gas, as much as you can carry, because there's no gas there. All the gas you need, you have to leave here with. You're going to have 2 Marines with all their gear, and you have 2 nurses. Thank you. And 2 55-gallon drums with cartons of milk on ice. The rest was empty. We didn't know who all we'd bring out. We just taking turns going in. So we got on our plane and we headed out, and it was daytime, and we happened to have no weather radar on board. We have it, but it wasn't working. But because it was daylight, we could see the storms that were moving around the area. We made it into Saigon. It was surrounded, but not real close to the airport. It was off a bit. But the fighting was pretty active. As we taxied over to this smaller terminal, the parking spot right next to where we were going towards had a South Vietnamese fighter plane that was just finishing getting ready for another run, and he closed its canopy and took off. So there was active fighting in the area. So we were turning right to pull into our spot when our nose gear steering went thunk. and we couldn't move anymore. Okay, so we had no maintenance, right? And the other thing that we were briefed on is that no one was supposed to stay on the ground. No planes stay on the ground overnight. So we didn't want to finish our turn. We didn't want to load any people until we saw what was going on. There was no ground support power carts and that sort of thing, so we always had to keep one engine running so we could use it to start the rest rather than ground power of some kind. So we left the number 4 engine, the one on the furthest right side, running. That's furthest away from the door that most people are in and out of. We shut off number 1 and 2 on the left side, the inboard on the right. We deplaned the people to go check out what happened. Don't load any people on board yet. We don't need that weight. We have to fix this. We had a small toolbox with the stuff you have at home, you know, because we always fly where there's maintenance, right? And so we went out there and we used our own landing gear pry bar. Sounds funny, but these modern airplanes still had about a 6-foot long metal pry bar that you could do some last resort things with the landing gear to get it down from the inside of the plane. So that was a solid metal bar. We took that out. We found some 2x4s by the terminal. We took those out. Got about 8 people, crew members mostly, and we scooched around the nose gear so it was straight again. It was hard over to the right. In a right turn, that's how it failed. And from the cockpit down to the nose gear, it's not a real long distance. We have a little steering wheel in there. That's what we use. And it's cable system back and forth, right? So that's what broke. So we don't have any parts to fix it. So we relashed up the cable and we reclamped it down the best we could. We felt safe to fly. We felt safe to bring others with. But it left the nose gear in a position where it could take a hard right turn if we wanted to go that way, or else it would take a shallow left turn, right? So it wasn't normal, but we could get home, right? We needed to. So we took a look, planned ahead, how are we going to get to the end of the runway? We knew we could make it with the turns we needed, so okay, get the people on board. So the people were asked to go all the way to the back, sit down, put your legs out in front of you, sit next to you, next one, make a row. Big, tall, you know, short, old, young, doesn't matter. And just filled up a row like this, and then, you know, those cargo straps that you see on flatbeds and around, we had those, and link that into the floor on one side and roll it across everybody's lap and link it on the other side and snug it down, one shared seatbelt. Next row, sit down. Next row, sit, same thing, everybody got one seatbelt. Got about, I don't know, 20 rows of people in there, as many as we could. The other thing the Air Force did for us to try to help us survive, they said, well, some of the planes came back with bullet holes in them, but there wasn't a lot of ground fire. But they were worried about heat-seeking missiles because they knew they were in the area. Of course, they go after your engine exhaust. So the Air Force actually had made up some bars that would fit in some fixtures either side of the paratroop doors, okay? There's one on the back on the left side, one on the back on the right. Put this bar across there, and on the bar they put 2 tubes that were welded in a certain place, certain angle. And inside those tubes, you could fit a flare gun. Okay, so one door had 1 bar and 2 tubes, 2 flare guns. The other door had the same setup. And the extent of our offensive weaponry or defensive weaponry was to open the paratroop doors. They slide up on rails and they click up, and we can open and close them during flight. And have one of our crew members on a harness with a cable that goes down the floor between people's feet. All the people nearby had pretty nice window view, looking at a paratroop door. A little windy, a little noisy. And their job was to watch for heat-seeking missiles out their side. And if they saw one, they'd fire, reload, fire, and talk on the headset. Across the intercom to us on the flight deck, left side. We'd go to the right, we'd try to climb out, we'd do whatever we could. So that's how we taxied out and left, looking for missiles. We didn't have one fired at us, thank God. As far as I know, no one did. But we had to be ready for that. So we climbed on out, and by the time we got the plane fixed and loaded all the people, we were the last plane to leave. So now it was getting dark, and you could see the fighting in the distance, several different directions. It really was surrounded, you know. I don't know how we were getting all these planes in and out. And of course, now we don't have the daylight to see the storms that were still there. And we still don't have our radar, so we're watching the lightning all the way back to the Philippines. I forgot to mention, Clark Air Base to Saigon was about 2.5 hour flight one way and then back. So we're going to Clark, dodging the storms. We get to Clark, want to land softly because we don't want to challenge our repair. And we did fine, and we taxied to where they wanted us to be. And then we unloaded the people, and I could just watch some of the people unloading. It was such a gratifying feeling to see all these people get to a different spot. That's when we knew when everybody was offloaded, now we're done flying. You know, we made sure we had that going until the end. And then we made a second trip, but I'm not going to extend this discussion today to talk a lot about that. That was interesting in its own way. But that's not the end of the story. After my time in the Air Force, I joined a local utility, a power plant, and I'm working there as an engineer, and a bunch of us in the military also went there, and we trade stories. We recognized where we had come from, and we enjoyed each other's company. So others knew that I had done this. And one of the other engineers had a project, and he had to hire some consulting. And one of the consultants that came out to the site to work was a Vietnamese engineer, newly graduated locally. And he says, oh, when did you come to all these questions? You know, he says, well, I flew out of Saigon with my family, you know. And he said, I need to have you talk to this guy, you know. So he brought him over, and I can't remember his name now, to see me. Both of them came over. And you flew out? Yeah, I flew people out. What day? I can't remember. I'll check. Me too. And he went double-checked with his family. It was like he and his sister and I think another, and then his parents came out together. I went and double-checked my dates. We met the next day, and did they match? No. Did it matter? No. So we started talking and reminiscing, sort of, and the conversation between two people was more like between four. It was a young, scared kid leaving his country in first airplane flight at night, and the only people he knew was his parents and all that, and talking to a aircrew member in a sweaty flight suit, you know. And it was back then, and then now we're talking engineer to engineer, and young person to veteran, thank you. You know, and we really appreciated that discussion, and he gave me a thank you hug on behalf of his family, and you know, that was pretty moving and pretty meaningful, and it made a connection to me from what I thought was a completed story in my life. Here's a new chapter. I just connected to the end of it. So that was pretty meaningful. The other part was, you know, his family's doing fine. Right? He's an engineer, but he's got a job, his family had a job. He talked about how they're happy and they're doing well. And I thought, you know, except for our Native American friends who were here first, you know, can we agree to that? Everybody else, all of us here, came from somewhere else. Every one of us. So did they. You know, and our country's built on that, and our country's been okay. And as long as we keep allowing folks like that to come in and join us, we're going to stay okay. So that's my message. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, that's so powerful. Now we're going to head to Darrell. He's going to tell us about his experience.
My name is Darrell Rask. I grew up just blocks from here. Went to St. Roseville Catholic Church. Graduated from Cretin High School in 1966. So I knew then I didn't want to do Army. Cretin High School's Army, I wasn't going to wear green. I had to wear blue. My brother was in the Navy, and he is a reservist. He did 2 years active duty. And he talked me into 3 years active duty. So I go to boot camp, and I take my basic battery of tests, and the guy says, Darrell, what do you want to be? I said, I want to be a corpsman. He says, you want to be a what? I said, I want to be a corpsman. He says, you did really well in your test. You can be anything you want to be. I want to be a corpsman. I said, okay, you're going to go to course school. So I go outside, my company commander says, Darrell, what are you going to be? I'm going to be a corpsman. He says, you're going to be a what? I'm going to be a corpsman. He said, you're going to be dead in a year. I said, excuse me? Didn't you know that Navy corpsmen go with Marines? I said, nope. So I go to Corps School, get sent to the Philippines. I'm there 2 days. The USS Forrestal catches on fire. Anybody remember that? 134 dead, 161 injured. During the Vietnam War, people thought, oh, sea duty is safe. USS Oriskany, October 26, 1966, 44 dead, 156 injured. January 14th, 1969, USS Enterprise, 27 dead, 314 injured. So my time in the Philippines, I spent about a year there, and the hospital ships would come in and leave off their patients with us. So the patients that Mary had would come from the sanctuary or repose, and they had to leave off all their patients to go back and get more. So for me, it was a conveyor belt. And one of the patients, I'll always remember, a 20-year-old Navy corpsman with the Marines, came from the sanctuary, both legs lost, multiple shrapnel wounds to the abdomen. He arrested 3 times before he died. And I'm thinking, I'm going to where he came from. Medics, nurses were non-combatants. We have to follow the Geneva Convention rules. We cannot fire a weapon, only to protect ourselves and protect our patients. The Army medics, Navy corpsmen, on that wall in Washington, there are 2,096 Army and Navy corpsmen and medics. 639 were Navy corpsmen. 4 of those corpsmen received the Medal of Honor as a non-combatant. The Viet Cong found out that if you kill 3 people in a platoon, you kill a whole platoon. So there was a bounty on the platoon leader, the radio men, and the medic corpsman. If you kill those 3 people, you kill a whole platoon. And we were non-combatants. The bounty was $70. So they got an extra $70 for killing us. For me, those 3 years, it was sort of like the tale of 2 cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. When I was in the Philippines, we had the USO tours come. Danny Kaye came. He wanted me court-martialed, but we won't go there. Aboard the Hancock, that was the aircraft carrier I was on, we had Bob Hope come. And guy is a true American hero. He brought with him on that tour Anne Margaret, the Gold Diggers, Rosie Greer, Miss World at the time. They all came down to sick bay. I'm this far from Anne Margaret. So aboard the carrier, we had doctors, but they weren't the best of doctors. So one day, one of our crewmen walked into a propeller. Our surgeons couldn't do that. The only surgery our surgeons did aboard ship were circumcisions. They didn't know how to do burr holes. So we flew into Da Nang, and whenever a patient went with them, a corpsman had to go with them as well. And so my only boots on the ground is 3 days in Da Nang, but aboard a carrier. So carriers were deployed for 9 months. We had about 3,500 people aboard ship, and we worked 16 hours every day. No days off. There were no weekends. He did the same thing every day. The pilots flew 12 hours a day, and the flight operations were 12 hours before and 12 hours afterwards. We came to port about once every 45 days, and we had 5 days in port and you had to work 2 or 3 of those. So out of 50 days, we had 2 or 3 days off. And this is why sailors had the bad reputation of being drunk. The only time you saw them was when they were drunk. We spent 9 months over there, working 16-hour days every day. And every 50 days, we have 2 or 3 days off. And we try to get as much fun in those 2 or 3 days as possible. So the carrier would come back to the States for 4 or 5 months to get repaired, go back out again for their 9 months. One of the things that happened after Vietnam, the Air Force and Navy found out if you deploy somebody for more than 6 months, your divorce rate and suicide rate goes up. So since then, the last time I heard, the Air Force and Navy doesn't deploy anybody for more than 6 months. So for me, it made me who I am, for better or for worse. I grew up, I had no idea what I wanted to be when I was 17 when I joined the Navy. So it got me into a nursing career. I became a nurse practitioner. Then I became an Air Force flight nurse, just in time to get to the first Gulf War. My timing was never good. But it made me for who I am. When I agreed to do this talk, I did it under one condition. I wrote a couple poems, and Kate has been nice enough to put them online, but I want to read them. Vietnam veterans. They were young boys and girls, so innocent and happy. They didn't want to go, but they went. They didn't understand, but they tried to comprehend. They didn't want to fight, but they fought. They all wanted to go back to the home they knew and the people they were. But home had changed, and so had they. Some came home injured on the outside. Some came home injured on the inside. Some came home in flag-draped boxes. Some came home and died by their own hand. Some went to touch the wall, and for some, the wall touched them. They all remember, but for some, only to remember the pain in silence. They are now older men and women, not so innocent, and only God knows, and if they are happy. Here's one for you, Mary. This is for the medical people in Vietnam. They came from the Great Plains, the Great Lakes, and our great cities. They were Jewish, Catholic, Baptist, and Lutheran. Some studied years to be doctors and nurses. Some studied only a few months to be corpsmen and medics. They knew in their minds it was wrong to be there, but they knew in their hearts it was right that they had to be there. Some slept in foxholes, and some slept in ships. But could they really sleep? They were trained to give shots and help the ones shot. They treated sunburns and burns of napalm. They helped the slightly injured back to health to fight the next battle. And they helped the mortally injured fight their last battle. They comforted friend and foe, child to senior, but who could comfort them? They had their heroes, the injured. They are the lucky few who had the opportunity to care for their heroes. God bless the heroes and the ones that took care of them. May they find peace, sleep, and be comforted. And that's me.
Very powerful, wonderful poetry. We're going to hear now from another poet, Hothien Yuen.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I've actually presented at every one of these 360s, so this is number 10. And I have to say that I think today reinforces just the fact that Just because something isn't in a history book or on the newspaper or on the news doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And it doesn't mean that it's part of our history. And I've learned so much from the people that I've been with, especially Dog Man here. He and I have been on the road together. And I just want to say how wonderful it is for you to be here and to be willing to listen and to learn from our stories. So a little bit about my history. I was born in Vietnam in August of 1974. So my family left when I was 9 months old. And one of the tragedies about being a refugee in this country, especially from the Vietnam War, is that no one really wanted to talk about the war. So no one talked about it in school. People, even my classmates didn't really know much about it. People's parents didn't want to talk about it. My father didn't want to talk about it. So I grew up kind of in a mystery of what really happened to my family, what happened to our country. And so I actually started to have to do the research myself. And so when I was in high school, I had the opportunity to do an interview assignment, and one of my teachers got me connected with a Vietnam vet from a VA. And I was actually really scared to talk to this person. I had no idea if they were going to resent me or have anger or how they would treat me. And he actually turned out to be very, very kind. And he told me a lot about his experience, how much he loved the Vietnamese people, how beautiful my country was. I had never heard anything about my country, especially how beautiful it was. And so it really changed me in a way that helped me understand that, he was just a young man, and he was much caught up in the tragedy of Vietnam as my family. And so it helped me open my heart and have more compassion and understanding that, my anger about the war wasn't about the veterans, because I really appreciate their sacrifice. It was about the government that chose who was dispensable and who, can be easily sent over and over and over to Vietnam. So through my excavating, I actually became kind of a scholar about war, not necessarily through history books, but through literature and art and through poetry. And I was recently lucky enough to be a scholar for the Minnesota Humanities Center with their War and Memory project. And so I've been learning a lot about the Vietnam War through veterans and the Ken Burns documentary. How many of you have watched the Ken Burns, Linda Novak documentary? Yeah. So I watched it twice, all 18 hours, and the special features, to work with the Humanities Center on their projects. And so the first time I watched it, I was just so taken aback. It was very emotional. And I just kept thinking, this is an abstract. People can watch this and think that it's something that happened to other people. And to me, watching my country be destroyed, watching, my family still in Vietnam, all the things that they had to go through during and after the war. And then the second time I watched it, I was a little bit more, I guess, observant, and I realized that, the filmmakers didn't really talk much about the Vietnamese people. They had soldiers, they had, some people, but the civilians were not really mentioned, and so many civilians died through either intentional or mistaken bombings or poverty or hunger, all these different things. And so today I'm going to do a little piece that just touches upon one story. And the thing is that what I've learned through working with the Humanities Center and through these conversations is that there are so many people involved in this war. It's so complicated. It wasn't just about Vietnam. It wasn't just about America. There's the Hmong, Laos, Cambodia, the Philippines, Korea. So many different people. And it has changed me so much today that I no longer call it the Vietnam War. To me, it's the war in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And so this is just one story. So I have a picture here of my mother when she was 18. And so I know a lot of you may not be too used to being in kind of performance art pieces, but I hope you bear with me. So this vase represents my mother's body. Today I ask you to exercise your ability to imagine and empathize, to listen to my words with your whole being, your mind, your body, your spirit, and your heart. It's called In Her Blood There Are Mountains. 1. My mother was born in October of 1944 during World War II in a small northern village near Hanoi called Nguyen, at the beginning of what some scholars call the Great Vietnamese Famine. This famine was brought upon by Japanese occupation and French colonialism that resulted in 1 million to 2 million dead. She has a primal fear of being hungry and carries food with her wherever she goes. This is the first war and trauma that she has survived. 2. In 1954, after the Indo-Chinese War, after the Vietnamese defeat the French, Vietnam is split into North and South regions. My mother at age 10 is separated from her immediate family and is put on a boat to Saigon by her father. She is to transport the family's possessions alone from one tip of the country to the other. This is the second war and first journey as a refugee she has survived. 3. Fast forward 9 years. It is 1963. My mom is 19 and is forced to marry my father against her will, who she was promised to when she was 9 years old. As Vietnam escalated into a civil war, my mother's body and being was colonized. 4. 12 years and 7 children later, the Vietnam War, or as the Vietnamese call it, the American War, comes to a turbulent and humiliating end. My father, who has worked for the US Army, has found a way for our family to escape a few days before the fall of Saigon on April 30th, 1975. He lies to my mother, tells her we will be going to Guam just until things settle down and we will come back. But all along he knows we are going to the US forever. My mother says a tortured goodbye to her family, especially to her mother, whom she fiercely loves, thinking she will see them again. As Vietnam becomes one country, my mother's heart is torn apart. She will never see her parents alive again. This is the third war and second separation she has survived. 5. In July of 1975, my family finally lands in Minnesota after being held in Guam and then a refugee camp at Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. At the refugee camp, we are crowded like cattle. My mother and father had nothing from their homeland except the clothes on their back, their 7 children, and as my father tells the story, $50 in his pocket. My mother speaks no English, has no real education, no knowledge of the US and its customs and rules. All our luggage, photos of our family, everything is taken by the US Army. All she holds is me, an 11-month-old baby, and her heartache and fear. This is the second journey as a refugee that she has experienced. 6, because she has no education and 7 children and no family in the US, my mother goes to work in countless Vietnamese restaurants in the Twin Cities. For 27 years, she works 7 days a week, sometimes 12 hours a day. She takes no vacations and has almost no friends nor real time to raise or care for her children. Her children grow up without her, without their Vietnamese culture or language, without a way to understand her or their own heritage. This is the third separation she has endured. 7. In 2006, my father dies rapidly of liver cancer and hepatitis B. My mother, now a widow, is retired due to a spinal injury from working on her feet so many years. Still a non-English speaking permanent resident alien, she has been left with no life insurance or retirement savings. She has no monetary or social capital, no understanding of how to navigate in the world outside of her role in the home as a Vietnamese wife. Angry at her husband for abandoning her, she now has to learn how to exist in a world that does not see her or her sacrifices. Eight. Today in 2018, my mom at age 73 has become fairly independent, despite the fact that she still does not speak English fluently and depends on her children to take care of her financial and healthcare matters. After undergoing intensive breast care treatment for the last year, she has started to reflect on her past and her wounds, far deeper and more dangerous than the cancer. Hopefully this cancer and her memories would be the last battle for peace that she survives. So if you can imagine that the weight of these rocks is the weight of trauma, and magnify this weight by millions of refugees, of thousands of veterans, of all the Americans that survived through the Vietnam War era, how much pain and suffering that we hold, and how much trauma that we have to heal. And that if we don't come together, if we don't tell our stories, if we don't open our hearts, if we don't love each other and care for each other, we will never move forward as a country. And we have to remember how much we're all connected and how much we still have to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Anh-Hoa, and all the panelists for sharing your story. That's really kind of what this whole initiative has been about. It's been so rewarding to be at all of these 360s, just to learn about your stories and hopefully encourage more people to share too. So now we'd like to hear from you if you have any questions for our panelists.
I have one for Jerry. Did you have experience with dogs before you became a dog man?
No, I didn't. I didn't at all, but he was an amazing dog. I tried to take him home. My last time out, my last mission, I happened to be working with the 1st Cav, and I had the CO said he'd write up an after-action report for me. I asked him if he would, and showing Rebel got killed in action. He said, "Dog man, I'll do that for you." And then I went to our vet tech and said, "Will you cut the tattoo out of his ear?" And he said, "I surely will." And then I went to RCO for 41st Scout Dog, because that's what I was in, the 41st Scout Dog attached to the big red one. And our CO said, I asked him if I could take him home, and he said no. And I said, "I'll give you $1,000 if you let me take him home." And he said to me, "Dog man, let me ask you a question. How many lives do you think you've saved?" And I said, "I have no idea." He said, "Well, take a guess." I said, "I have no idea." He says, "Well, I know. I'm the one that's been sending you out on the missions for the last 12 months. I'm guessing you've saved somewhere between 15 to 20,000 veterans, soldiers. So my question to you, dog man, is when you take him back to Minnesota, how many is he going to save there?" I didn't like the answer. And the thing I didn't like about 2 years ago when I was researching, look up war dogs on your computer. They put all our dogs down in 1974. They killed every single one of them. And yet they gave every single part. Those dogs are absolutely unbelievable on what they were able to do. So thank you for the question. Other thing I want to add, please ask questions. Every time I speak, I say this. We here are telling you what we think you want to know. We are not going to know what you want to know until you ask that question.
So how do you all look at that now?
You know, those are always difficult questions for me because I got home in '69 and they're still difficult questions. Those questions for me to field is what you did over there, was it right? Because part of me says, yes, it absolutely was right. But it still become difficult questions when we watch the Ken Burns ones. I'll have to say when I was over there, I was against the protest, obviously because I'm there fighting. My dad was in World War II. My older brother was in Vietnam. My second oldest brother was in Germany because they couldn't send him to Vietnam because my older brother was there. I was in Vietnam, like you know, and my younger brother was in Korea. They couldn't send him to Korea because I was over there. So with a family history, and my great-grandfather was in the war also, so with the family history, it was like, you know, I have to care for my country. I love my country. And so it's really difficult still to answer those questions, but I have to agree that they were part of ending the war. One of the frustrating parts for me was in the documentary when I hear President Nixon, who at the time in the documentary when he wasn't president yet, and this isn't me saying it, it was in the documentary, you all saw it, when 3 months before he was elected, he contacted the 4 different groups that were at the Paris peace talks, which is the Viet Cong, North Vietnam, South Vietnam, and the Americans. He contacted them all and said, back away from the table. Back away from the table now. Don't go to the Paris peace talks because I'm going to be the president. I'm going to be elected in about the next 3 months. And I want credit for stopping this war. And when I heard that, we had 500 GIs every single week that were getting killed. And he didn't give a damn about that. All he cared about was that he could be elected as president. And those are the things I saw over and over. I've got a number of other things to talk about, but I'd rather get, please, your questions.
For me, after watching the movie, remember you seen the movie Post that came out? There's so much I didn't know. And it goes back to Eisenhower, Truman. I think on TPT there were a couple series, the 10,000 Day War. That's how long that war lasted. It was 10,000 days. I think while you're over there, all you want to do is do your job, come back home alive as much as you can. So we weren't looking into politics. We just wanted to come back home.
Yeah, I agree. I learned a lot from watching the Post and the series. I don't know if I had forgotten some of this in real time, But the Nixon aspect really gets to me, that people were killed for that. And you wonder today if there are things politically happening. I guess I thought you'd answer yes, and I guess I was expressing my dissatisfaction today is about equivalent to what it was then.
Do you want to add anything on Anh-Hoa or Mary, Beth?
So I think my deepest, darkest moment of the Ken Burns Lynn Novak documentary was seeing that memo that said 70% of why they were in Vietnam was to avoid humiliation, and 20% was for the democracy, and 10% for the Vietnamese people. And I think we really need to think about that kind of hubris when other people's countries are at stake. Or for me, Vietnam is not a war. It is a country. It is people. It is my history. And I think it's really, really important that people understand war and its complexities, because it's never really about what they tell you it's about. And no one ever talks about the land, the rubber, the resources, the oil that's happening. And no one actually thinks about what happens to the land itself once you've destroyed it, right? Millions of tons of bombs on Vietnam, all the Agent Orange that is killing people, still killing our veterans, the suicide rates for veterans, the suicide rates for survivors. I mean, war does not just end when the shooting stops. And so I think people need to start seeing it in a broader way.
I guess I'll add my 2 cents here. I think when I first went to Vietnam, I thought we had a reason for being there. And somewhere while I'd been there, I think I decided that the people really didn't want us to be there, and so why were we there? Somewhere along the way, too, I figured out that nobody wins a war. I don't care which side you're on. I think the last war that there was a true reason was the Second World War, and I really wonder if there ever will be a just reason for going to war. I think the war we're in now, there's no reason for being there. The people don't want us there. Maybe in a couple hundred years they'll be ready for democracy, but they surely aren't now. You know, they're a tribal people, and they will be for the next few hundred years. I don't know. I think I'm against pretty much all wars at this point, and nobody ever wins them, no matter what. And I think there's always an economic reason why politicians go into war. Somebody's making money off of it at the risk of other people losing their lives, and nobody seems to care then, so.
Other questions? Okay.
I don't remember your name. Maybe it's Carmen. Oh, Darrell.
Darrell.
How did you manage to avoid being a corn on tax for the Marines?
My brother was aboard the aircraft carrier Hancock. I asked to be stationed with him. The Navy promoted that as long as there were other brothers not in a combat zone. I could do that. There was a ship during World War II that had 5 boys on it, the Sullivans, and that prevented all of a family being on one ship at the same time. So I was lucky enough to go aboard the Hancock. My brother got transferred out before I got there. But I always tell people I had a problem with my back then. It was all yellow. See, I got the microphone. I'll go first. I haven't gone back. I don't plan to. My reason is, at last count, there are 1,200 Americans unaccounted for missing in action over there. Until they're returned, I won't go.
I have not been back. As a flyboy, I was not on the ground like the folks who probably have more into that decision than I do. But I can tell you that my daughter, in her master's program, had a trip to Vietnam and other countries around there. She actually went to the Hanoi Hilton, a place that I never wanted to see, the place that I knew prisoners from, and the place that I was trained to do the same code tapping before I even pinned on my wings so that I could survive the camp. So there are others close to me that have gone over there, and I've got some reactions to that, and that's enough for me.
No, I have never been back to Vietnam. I don't want to go back to Vietnam. I don't care to. I don't need to. I've settled in my heart, and I've, over the years, have been able to work through it, and so I don't care to go. I want to just quickly touch on the real story on Vietnam. I want you all to. My dad was in World War II, so I honor the World War II soldiers. Please understand that. The true story behind it, if you take a look at, in World War II, the average combat soldier saw 40 days of combat in 4 years. The average Vietnam combat soldier saw 209 days of combat in 12 months. And you wondered why a lot of them came back the way they did. I speak a lot on suicides and PTSD, probably 50, 60 times a year. And I can talk on this an awful lot, but I want your questions.
So I've actually been back to Vietnam 4 times. And the first time I went back was in 2007 with my mom, who'd never been back before. And she only decided to go after my dad passed away. And so she hadn't seen her family in 32 years. It was really remarkable. And I have to say that for me, learning about the Vietnam War or the American War or the war in Southeast Asia from the other side is it was very eye-opening for me to understand that there is no one true story of any situation. And it was really chilling, actually, to see some of the photos of the people who were affected by Agent Orange, the deformed children. And so for me, it was seeing the gruesomeness of war that nobody here really wants to talk about or see. But it also helped me heal because I saw how the country was healing. I saw how the people were healing in a way that we aren't here in the United States, because we don't have any reconciliation, and we don't have any sense of clarity or atonement, and I think it's interesting to see how 2 people involved in the same conflict, how they've moved on or haven't moved on from it. But Vietnam is beautiful, and the food is great, and I would encourage you to go.
I went back about 1.5 years ago, and I thought it was very helpful. And we flew pretty much all over the country, and from the air, you would never know there had been a war there at all. I thought the people in Hanoi were a lot friendlier than the people were in Saigon. But everywhere in the major cities where you look, there's building going on. It seems like a lot of the well-to-do Chinese are buying up a lot of the land in Vietnam. I know in Da Nang, the beaches, I went in December, so it was kind of chilly, but along the beaches in Da Nang, a lot of the Chinese are buying up all the waterfront property there, which I find interesting. And I just thought it was fascinating, and it seems like the people are interested in Americans coming over there, and I know a number of Americans are traveling there at this point. Even, people in their 20s and 30s are traveling over there just to see what it's like as a country, and they have a vast history from years ago. So I found it interesting, and I thought it was very healing for me too.
Thank you. I wish we had another hour to talk and ask questions, but I think we've reached our end here. I'm sorry, we can't take any more questions. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you all again for coming. I just want to quickly introduce my colleague Kate Westland, who is the curator of our Story Wall website, where anybody can share their own story. We invite you to look for their stories on the Story Wall and also share your own. Kate will mention briefly how to do it.
Hi. Rather than giving you a step-by-step how-to, just in the interest of time, I want to direct all of you. The URL was up there. We also have a lot of postcards out in the back on the table, and a lot of you were here before we set them up, so everything is still set up. We encourage you to take the DVDs that Katie was referring to earlier. We've got a card that talks about the program that we have at the end of June 21st through 24th. We'll have The Wall That Heals. We'll be at the state capitol grounds. Yes, so we hope to see you there, and as part of that we will have an extensive story collection effort, so if you don't get online and share your story yourself, between now and then we hope to see you at the event, and I will be there with computers and pens and paper and all the stuff you need so that you can add your voice to this growing collection of stories, because I think to all of their points, it's important and healing to tell the stories, and everyone has a story to tell, even if you were a child during the war. As a child of a veteran, I feel like I am impacted, or I know that I am impacted also by this war. Civilians have stories to tell, so hope to keep adding to it and making it a more rich collection with everyone's help. So, do you have anything else, Katie?
Just a couple quick things. So you know we have more events that you can access on our website, mnvietnam.org. One coming up featuring pilots and nurses of Vietnam in an event called Skies Over Vietnam on May 20th at TPT. You can get tickets online. Also, we have an event, a screening of the Going to War film that TPT produced. It's a national production that features Vietnam veteran Carl Marlantes and also the author of The Perfect Storm and War, Sebastian Junger. So this is going to be a great documentary that premieres on Memorial Day, but also we're having a sneak peek screening if you'd like to come and join us for that on May 22nd. Another original documentary with Minnesota's Vietnam veterans' stories is going to be premiering directly after the Going to War special on Memorial Day. So tune in at 9 p.m. to TPT to catch the documentary called Perspectives. So like Kate said, join us at The Wall That Heals. This is going to be a special event. We're bringing a traveling replica of the Vietnam Wall. And we'd love to hear from all of you. If you have questions, want to get involved, just visit our website. It's the best way to get in touch. Thank you again to Melsa and all of you for coming. Thanks.